Welcome, everyone, to Protecting the Joy of Learning for Students Living in Transition. I am Sabrina Rudy, Special Populations Consultant here at Wayne Risa, and I am overjoyed that you have chosen to spend what looks like a beautiful day out there with us, the next hour with us. So thank you so much. I know some of you may be back at work. Some of you may still be enjoying the last few days that you possibly can of this summer. That seems like it has gone by very quickly, but I appreciate that you are here with us. So again, you're here at the session titled Protecting the Joy of Learning for Students Living in Transition. And we're going to be talking a little bit about education being a fundamental right and making sure that this right is upheld for all. And then learning how to protect that learning for students experiencing homelessness. So, who are students experiencing homelessness? They are anyone, if you're familiar at all with the McKinney-Vento law, this is wording from the law. They're students who lack a fixed, regular, and adequate nighttime residence. Or whose primary residence is a shelter, motel, vehicle, or campground. So students who are living in transition are protected under this federal law, McKinney-Vento Homeless Assistance Act. This was enacted in 1987, and it was most recently reauthorized in 2015 in the Every Student Succeeds Act. And the purpose of this law is to ensure educational stability and support for students who are experiencing homelessness. Now, the definition of homelessness under McKinney-Vento Act is broader than you'll see sometimes in some governmental definitions. So it refers to this lack of a fixed, regular, and adequate nighttime residence. That doesn't mean that they need all three of those characteristics in order to be considered homeless under McKinney-Vento. They don't have to have fixed, regular, and a lack of fixed, regular, and adequate. They could have only one of those. So this includes students who share housing due to an economic hardship. And that's oftentimes the majority of the students that we have that qualify under McKinney-Vento are these students who are called double up. They moved in with their family may have moved in with another family. Perhaps they lost their house because someone lost a job, or the landlord has asked them to leave, or a multitude of reasons, perhaps due to a fire, and they don't have the economic means to find another place to live. So they are now doubling up with another family. Students living in motels, hotels, or shelters also qualify. Anyone who's living in a public or private space that's not designed for sleeping, such as in cars, parks, campgrounds. Now we know campgrounds, you can sleep in a campground, but that's temporary. So if people are staying there for a long term because they can't find other housing, that could be considered McKinney-Vento eligible. Another category that I want you to be aware of, if you're not already, is unaccompanied youth. They may qualify as well if they're not in the physical custody of a parent and they meet the definition of homeless under McKinney-Vento. So we sometimes have students who are unaccompanied youth, but they're not homeless. So we'd have to look at their living situation in order to determine whether or not they fall under this category and being McKinney-Vento eligible. So in 2020-21 school year, there were over 1 million public school students who are identified as McKinney-Vento eligible in the United States. Now in Wayne County, we have close to 3,000 children that were identified in K-12, and that number most likely represents an under-identification. And we're going to talk a little bit about that in a few slides. So the challenge that we have, though, is that students who are eligible for McKinney-Vento services, and you'll hear me use interchangeably students living in transition, students who are McKinney-Vento eligible, or students who are experiencing homelessness. these are services the children often don't have access to a stable and consistent learning environment. So that increases their risk of falling behind academically. So we're going to talk about some things to address that. So challenges, what gets in the way? There are often barriers that students face when they are living in transition. One of the things that I've noticed in this role, I've been in this position as special populations consultant for about a year and a couple months. And it's a new role here at Wayne Risa. And one of the things that I've really noticed in this year, a little over a year, is that we often have families who are not aware of the law. Now, some people are learning, some people know. They know what McKinney-Vento means, but what I find a lot of times is that they're not aware that there are certain rights available to them. And one of those rights is the stability, to keep. One of the purposes of McKinney-Vento is to provide stability. We know that there is a negative impact when students have to change schools in the middle of the school year, or they change schools multiple times. And if families are not aware of their rights or what's available to them under McKinney-Vento, then they may have lost their home, move maybe the next city over with cousins or whomever they're staying with, or maybe they've had to seek shelter. And they end up enrolling their children in the school that's near them. Well, under McKinney-Vento, when a student is experiencing homelessness, they have the right to remain at what we would call their school of origin, where they were attending when they were permanently housed and became homeless. So we want to make sure that families and school personnel are aware of this right, so that children don't have that disruption. They already have a disruption in their living arrangements. We don't want to have that disruption in their education as well. We know that students create or develop relationships with friends and teachers, and having that continue is very important for students who are experiencing a disruption in another part of their lives. So when we determine that a student is experiencing homelessness and they are McKinney-Vento eligible and can receive some supports, one of the supports that a district is responsible for is making sure that they have transportation to that school of origin. So if a family has lost their home and they're doubling up with a family in the next city, and they want to remain at that school of origin, because it is ultimately up to the parents. They could choose to go to the school that they're living near. But if they choose to go to the school that their children were at when they were permanently housed, then that district would arrange transportation for that student to come back to their school of origin every day. So we want to make sure that families are aware that this is available. This could mean perhaps a bus, a cab, a taxi. There are some ride services that are specific for students experiencing homelessness or in foster care companies out there. Or it may be the family, the parent or somebody, a family member is able to drive them every day back to their school of origin. And then through McKinney-Vento law, they can be provided a reimbursement for mileage. So those are some things that can take place to make sure that we protect our students. Stigma is another thing that gets in the way. Students and families experiencing homelessness often feel isolated and ashamed, and they might not seek support or help. I find too, some families are afraid that if anyone finds out that they're experiencing homelessness, someone will take their children away. So we want to make sure that we protect our students, we protect our families and their confidentiality. We wouldn't say, oh, they're living in a car, so we're going to report them to Child Protective Services. right? We would want to make sure that we are addressing the barriers for them to have their student at school. So let's say we know that attendance is a huge issue for students who are living in transition. And we want to do our best to provide any supports that we can to address that barrier. Another thing that gets in the way, and this gets in the way of that attendance piece as well, are the basic needs, right? Hunger, illness, lack of sleep, because we don't know where some families are sleeping when they're experiencing homelessness. The shelters are full. And especially during the cold months, I've had families show up at a shelter, and the only place that they have is a chair to sleep in for the evening. So it's, we don't know the conditions that some children may be sleeping in, so they may be coming to school hungry, not feeling well, not getting a good night's sleep, which of course affects their academic performance and overall well-being. So just some things to be aware of and what to look for, especially as we talked about that identification piece, which we'll address. So when we were at Lisa to consider facilitating a session for this summer blitz, I knew this would be a great opportunity for me to raise awareness around the needs of students experiencing homelessness, and perhaps at a wider audience than I usually have access to. So I said, sure, I'll do a summer blitz session, anything to address the under-identification that we have in Wayne County. So I submitted my title and description and received a response. And this was the response: can you incorporate the theme of joy in your title? And I thought to myself, how is homelessness related to joy? But this required me to look a little bit more deeply into the concept of joy. And when people think of joy, they often think of the word happiness. They tend to be synonymous for most. So I'd like you to look at these three perspectives on joy. Take some time to read them and reflect on each of these for a few moments. I'm going to give you a few moments to do that. So the first one is from the dictionary. It's just the definition from the Merriam-Webster dictionary: the emotion evoked by well-being, success, or good fortune, or by the prospect of possessing what one desires. The other one is from Brene Brown, a social scientist who is has some pretty amazing work if you're not familiar with her. And she says that it's an intense feeling of deep spiritual connection, pleasure, and appreciation, a positive attitude that comes from feeling connected to yourself. And then Goldie Muhammad, if you're familiar with her work, Cultivating Genius, she has a book also called Unearthing Joy. She says it's more than celebration and happiness, but also as wellness, beauty, healing, and justice for oneself and across humanity. So I just want you to think about what stands out for you in these three perspectives. Is there anyone that you connect with over the other two? And if you could just place your thoughts in the chat. Put any thoughts as well. If you connect with the first one or the second one or the third one, if you could add why you connect with that one or what stands out to you. What are your thoughts? Yes, I'm with you, Dawn. You know, I'm still having trouble understanding why joy would be added to this topic title, and we're going to get to that. I promise. Some people like two. It reads easily. Joy evokes a feeling of peace and connection with well-being and happiness. Thank you. Joy is specifically personal to an individual's self, is what I connected with. Thank you for that. A lot of people are picking two because one person has chosen it because it speaks to a spiritual connection. Number three, because it's wellness and healing. Two, a positive attitude, finding an ability to appreciate things and look for the positive. Connecting with the emotion evoked by well-being because it brings fulfillment. Yes, these are great, great, great. Humanity is key. Some people like all of them. I personally do as well. The Goldie Muhammad, wellness, beauty, healing, and justice are important. Thank you so much. So I find that I connect with all of these as well. And I think the first one, the definition from the dictionary, gives me pause because it makes me think that you must have everything going well in order to experience joy. But possessing what one desires is subjective and relative, right? So where it says, you know, possessing what one desires, well-being, success, what is success? Who defines success? Right? It's a very personal thing. So when I first looked at the definition, I'm like, I don't think I like that. But then when I started thinking a little bit, yeah, we define success for ourselves, right? And that's really where we can tap into joy, is where we're able to define that for ourselves. We're able to connect to ourselves. And that's why I like the Brene Brown one, because you're connecting to yourself. So I'm going to go to the next one. And I want you to look at the difference between happiness, what this says about happiness, and joy. Happiness versus joy. Take a moment to look this over. It says happiness is a feeling based on circumstances, and joy is an attitude that defies circumstance. Happiness can be fleeting, right? It's a response to external factors, while joy is that inner work. Joy comes from within. And everything doesn't have to be perfect in order to be joyful. But I want to caution you at this point, though. This is not to diminish the real struggles that people face. I can't just tell someone to look at the bright side of things and be joyful. I could never say, well, it could be worse, right? Because everyone has their own definition of what that is. Everyone has their own reality that they're living in. What I think might be horrible circumstances or things going on right now. Someone else may think, oh, I wish I had that going on. So it's all relative to our own lived experiences. But there are certain conditions that need to be in place in order for someone to recognize joy. And that's what we're going to talk about. That's how we're going to tie joy to this, because everybody can experience joy no matter what's going on. But as educators, there are some things that we can do to create that space for joy to live. There are some things that we can do to create safety. So I'd like to have you engage in some reflection based on the following scenarios. So the first one says, think of your routine during a specific time of day. For example, when you wake up or when you get home from work or when you get ready for bed. How would that routine be different if you were living in a motel or in a car? Or even doubled up with a family in, you had to share a bedroom with your children? That'd be different. I'll give you just a moment or two to think about your own personal experience with that and envision what that would look like. So the next one says, if you had to move into a car with your family, what would you take with you? What would you have to leave behind? And how would that feel? And then the third one I'd like you to consider is, what is one tangible thing that you own and you don't think you could live without? How important would it be to have that thing with you if you were experiencing homelessness? And how easy or difficult would it be to keep with you? So I'll give you a moment to think about that. In this activity, and I was thinking about these things, the first thing that came in mind to my mind was, what would I take with me? What's valuable to me? And one of the things, of course, is like a cell phone, right? I mean, cell phones are very important to us. We're on them all the time. And I thought, I thought about, what if I had a student in my room that I wasn't aware of their living situation for whatever reason? Maybe no one had shared anything with me. Maybe I just wasn't observant. Maybe I didn't know the child well enough to know that things may have changed for them or so on. And they had a cell phone, and our policy is to take the cell phone away in the school that I'm teaching in. So I'm going to take that cell phone away. And what if that's the only thing that they feel is connecting them right now with people that are supporting them? How would that make them feel? What if I'm a 5-year-old and I have a toy like this little girl in the picture? And that's providing some comfort to her, right? Maybe that's the only thing she was able to take because she didn't have much room. I'll tell you, when we do these fairs, we do a lot of, raising awareness around homelessness and that families know about their rights. And one of the most popular items that people come to, not just families, but the fairs are often many people come to visit these homeless awareness resource fairs. So they don't necessarily have children or fall into McKinney-Vento, but we have like little backpacks. They are a hot item. Like, they are very important because there's a place that they can store some of their things. So if I had to leave suddenly and all I could do was whatever I could put in that backpack, what would you take? And this really made me think about the things that we do unintentionally that may actually cause more harm in some ways. And I'm not saying this to make anyone feel bad, right? It's just a thought. Like, how can we think about what this could mean for our students? Because we know there are more students than the number that I mentioned in Wayne County than what we really have. So there are students who are unidentified. They're experiencing homelessness, and we're not even aware of that. Oops, I'm sorry. I accidentally went ahead. So I just want to give you an idea to think about what this may be like and some scenarios. So while these do not encompass all the feelings and challenges that are related to homelessness, they're just meant to provide a space for you to connect with some of the anxiety a child may be feeling. Consider now, what would one of your students need to create that space for joy? So for the remainder of the time, I'm going to share some practices that you can engage in that support your students living in transition and perhaps create that space for joy, right? Because in order to feel joyful, the word that always comes to my mind is safety. It's difficult to concentrate on what you're joyful about or to tap into that connectedness, that inner work, if you're not feeling safe, right? Like, if you've done any trauma work or so on, you understand the trauma brain, how it works, and there are certain parts of your brain that are working overtime if you don't feel safe. So what can we do to provide as much support as we can so there is a space for joy? So there are some basic best practices to support students. And while these may be best practices to support any student, I'm going to discuss how they apply directly to students experiencing homelessness. And I refer to this identifying students. So educators and administrators need to be aware of the signs of homelessness and identify impacted students, even if you're just suspecting it. Perhaps a student that you've had for a while is starting to come late to school, perhaps, and the family may not want to say anything. Even if the family doesn't say, hey, we're experiencing homelessness, or, we're living in transition, or we're doubled up with a family, or we lost our house. Even if they don't tell you, it's still every educator's responsibility to watch for the signs and be able to identify and provide additional supports. Another thing is to eliminate or remove barriers or address barriers. So eliminate institutional barriers to ensure equal access to education, including transportation, uniforms, fees. So if you have a student who's experiencing homelessness and they are a part of, let's say, band, and the band, I'm just thinking back to my days in school, the band would go to band camp, and perhaps I don't have the fees for that, and everybody's going, then I can look at ways to address that. Or I've noticed, this is an interesting thing, I've noticed with graduation. So there are a lot of fees surrounded around graduation, not just the cap and gown, but oftentimes you're paying for the venue, you're paying fees for the decorations, you're paying fees for the tickets, you're paying fees, like there's a lot built into those senior dues that some districts call them, or graduation fees and so on. Is there a way that we can address some of those things? Are there things that we can look at as a system, as a, within your district, to say, why are we charging for that? Is there a way that we can address that differently? And then we talked about stability, right? Making sure that students are provided the most stable environment, because outside of school, it's not very stable right now. So providing that supportive school environments to minimize that impact that being homeless may have. So when addressing barriers, we're looking at unique needs. So perhaps a student is living in a shelter, or they're doubled up with a family, and they don't have a space to complete homework. So you might have to really get down into the specifics around what their life looks like outside of the school, so you can help address those barriers to learning. And that takes, of course, building that relationship, that trust with that family, so that they can share with you as an educator. They know they can go to you and say, my child doesn't have a space to do their homework, that's why it's not done. Or when we go home, we have to be in the shelter by a certain time, so we're not able to, they're not able to participate in something that you think that they should. So, let's say you do after school tutoring, you have a program that you want the child to participate in, perhaps they're not able to. maybe they do need to be in that shelter by a certain time or else they don't get a space. I mean, every shelter operates differently across the country. So, there are very specific things that you may come across that are very unique to each family. So it's finding out what those barriers are and addressing them. Maybe there's another way that you could provide some additional tutoring for that student. Perhaps you can provide a computer and an online tutoring program or something. So there's a way to address those things, and we'll talk about who to connect with in your district if you're not aware already. School connectedness is a huge one. This is a protective factor. So we know that any student that has experienced trauma, some challenges, school connectedness is one very substantial protective factor for that student. So it's a belief that the adults and the peers in their school care about their learning and also care about them as individuals. So finding out, that's why it's so important to find out when you have a student who's living in transition, what specifically are they faced with, so that you can help support them and they feel supported. And then another thing is a school-wide approach. So you're not alone in this. While I would like you to think about, one way that you can support students' learning and the joy of learning in your own setting, you have somebody in your district who is dedicated to supporting students experiencing homelessness. And that is, so by law, every district must have a homeless education liaison. So if you don't know who your liaison is, find out. Please, everybody should know the name of your homeless liaison. And sometimes it changes. We do have some turnover with homeless liaisons. So if you don't know, you can reach out to me. You can email me. I'll have my email at the end of the presentation. You can Google CEPI, CEPI, and then EEM. That's the Educational Entity Master. And you can look up a district, or you can look up at the district level and find out, because certain roles have to be listed in the EEM. So every district has to have a homeless liaison and a foster care liaison identified in the Educational Entity Master. So that's one way you can find out if you don't know. Or of course you can ask a colleague, administrator, if they know, if you don't know who it is, if they know. So the homeless liaison must be made aware of any student that you may even just suspect is experiencing homelessness, because they can do an evaluation and determine whether or not the student does fall under the McKinney-Vento law to receive those supports and services. They can address some of the barriers that are often faced. So if a student is already identified and some of the supports that were put in place are not meeting the need, the homeless liaison can explore additional supports for that child. Every district that receives Title I dollars sets aside a certain amount of money in their Title I set-asides to help address the needs of students experiencing homelessness and students in foster care as well. So I'd like you to consider committing to the following. Starting small. One person can make a difference. Advocate for policies that support students living in transition and help create a more equitable education system. And you know the policies in your district, right? You know some of the things, and maybe even not a policy that's written, but maybe a practice that may be affecting students that you come across or that you support or that you touch, that just aren't serving the needs, right? So be an advocate. So to best support students who are experiencing homelessness, give the students and their families a voice. Listen and learn from them. Let them tell you what their needs are. And then, of course, empowering students to be advocates for their own education, uplifting their voices and stories. So I know, one of the comments was, how does joy connect? I hope you see that by providing a safe space, maybe school is a place where they can experience that joy, right? Maybe school is the place where they feel safe enough to connect with themselves, their well-being, their history, their healing, because they're dealing with a lot of other things. So how can we provide that space? When do you feel, experience, and share joy in your classroom or your office or wherever you are in the educational system? Where does it fit for you and the students that you work with? So I want to thank you so much for joining me today. I'm going to give you some time in a few moments to ask questions, but I want to make sure that you know my contact information, my email, and my phone number here. If you have any questions about this or anything else really, and you don't know who to connect with at Wayne Risa, I can get you to the right person if I'm not the right person. So I really want to thank you for your time.